I've waited so long to ask you this question, Mort. Mort, will you marry me?
24 times still. Go away!
This is no country for old men. Hi, I'm Ben, and today I will be taking you on a journey of discovery, a voyage into the mind of one of the 20th century's most influential poets, the great Irishman William Butler Yeats. The poem I will be dissecting is the first in his 1928 collection, The Tower, a collation of his late modernist poetry. Written in 1927 when Yeats was in his 60s, Sailing to Byzantium describes the journey of an old man as he sails away from his homeland towards the holy city of Byzantium. The persona in the text undergoes a metaphorical journey by escaping from his current reality, turning away from the temporal and natural world towards the immortality found in art. When read in terms of the context of the deeply pessimistic era following World War I, an era where modernist writing had started to take prominence, the poem can be read as Yeats's comment on his dissatisfaction with society, especially with growing older and the prospect of death growing ever closer for Yeats. W.B. Yeats, unlike a large proportion of writers, continued to produce some of his greatest works in his old age. A key part of this continued prominence was a tonal transitioning from Romanticism to Modernism. Modernism saw a radical shift in the aesthetic and cultural focus of literature in the early 20th century. The development of industrialized society, rapid growth of cities, and the aftermath of World War I saw modernist authors presenting a pessimistic picture of a culture in disarray. This saw a dominance of realism and imagist writing, favouring blunt language and a more conversational tone. The general agenda of modernism was to break from traditional norms and focus on the alienation and isolation that was rife in society. After his disappointment with Maud Gonne and disenchantment with the Irish national movement and the aftermath of World War I, Yeats questioned his own ideals for the future of Ireland. His poetry subsequently became more bitter and pessimistic, his later poetry typified as stark, presenting many truths about the human state. Yeats displays many signs of typical modernist disenchantment, a sense of individual isolation within modernity, pessimism over contemporary society, and a belief that the world had become spiritually bankrupt. Yeats demonstrates this pessimism, especially in works like Sailing to Byzantium, where there is a focus on the individual and his alienation in society as he grows older. Yeats echoes modernism with the use of straightforward diction, yet complex metaphorical language and imagery. The heavy use of symbolism and setting with the metaphor of Byzantium reflects the modernist style. Themes such as death and immortality are explored that lead the reader to think about the harsh realities of life and death. This quest for truth, another staple of the modernist sphere. Through Sailing to Byzantium, Yeats expresses the discontent he feels growing older and his deep yearning to stay remembered after he passes away. The thematic mood of the poem epitomizes the characteristics of the modernist movement in literature. My old mate, William Butler Yeats, will now give his reading of Sailing to Byzantium. Take it away, Willie. Sailing to Byzantium. That is no country for old men, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song. The salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh or fowl commend all summer long. Whatever is begotten, born and dies, caught in that sensual music, all neglect, monuments of an aging intellect. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. Nor is there singing school but studying, monuments of its own magnificence. And therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. O sages standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, burn in a gyre, and be the singing masters of my soul.
consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fasten to a dying animal. It knows not what it is, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. Once out of nature, I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make, of hammered gold and gold enameling, to keep a drowsy emperor away, or sit upon a golden bough to sing, to lords and ladies of Byzantium, of what is past, or passing, or to come.
Typical of late Yeats's Imagist style, the first line of the poem sets the tone bluntly. The narrator lives in a place that is no country for old men. He feels out of place in a society where young people and their lack of inhibitions dominate. The youth only care for themselves, neglecting the dying generations. The imagery of the young in one another's arms reflecting how they prioritize relationships, often sensual or sexual. Like fish in nets, they are so caught up in that sensual music of hedonism and sensuality that they fail to admire the eternal things in life, such as art. Yeats uses the auditory imagery of the sensual music to highlight the juxtaposition between what the old and the young value. The second stanza illustrating that to the youth, an aged man is but a paltry thing, an archaic husk. An old man to them is merely a tattered coat upon a stick, worthless in their eyes. The mackerel, salmon, fish and fowl all symbolize this transient nature of life, how every living creature will eventually expire. Whatever is begotten, born and dies, it is the natural cycle of life. The realization that an unavoidable aspect of life is in fact death. Through these constant reminders of mortality and the transience of life, Yeats displays his own personal fear of death. Yeats, like the narrator, doesn't belong in his homeland either, the young caught up in the sensual music and allure of violent nationalism. Yeats's mind is haunted by the dying generations who gave their life in the Irish Rebellion in World War I, those he watched with their loved ones giving their final embrace in one another's arms. What needs to happen is for the music of the soul to take precedence over the birds in the trees, but there are no such singing schools. The man can make his soul sing again by using his wisdom to study the monuments of its own magnificence, what the soul of man has built. These great works of art, however, are found far away in the eternal city of Byzantium. The holy city, as the central metaphor of the text, symbolizes a world of magnificence and artistic permanence, a rich and inclusive culture like that of the Byzantium Empire. In Byzantium, the man can find the acceptance he seeks in old age. Byzantium was the center of 6th century civilization, a cultural mecca artistically utopian in nature, and a meeting point of various cultures. The commonality of Byzantium between traditions supports the notion that the human desire to seek immortality is universal. Yeats then uses Byzantium to symbolize a place that resolves the eternal struggle between the limitations of the physical body and the aspirations of the immortal spirit. In writing about a city that does not exist anymore, Yeats conjures up the idea that Byzantium truly represents this idea of the eternal. It houses the past, the gold mosaics, which have and will hang for time immemorial. Despite Byzantium being long gone, it remains an eternal artifice, the singing soul of a man who can no longer sing. The man escapes to this place to revive his soul through the glorious monuments of unaging intellect, which will never fade, unlike the human body. The man's movement away from nature to art exemplifies Yeats's transition away from romanticism as an inversion of the classical feature of literature, where nature is celebrated. Yeats warns that by being too sensual, people are ignoring the immortal legacy that art can provide. The poem's structure of stanzas in ottava rima, a classical poetic form with 8-line stanzas and an A-B-A-B-A-B-C-C rhyme scheme, reflects this timeless nature of art. Although the poem is predominantly in iambic pentameter, an important deviation is made by Yeats when he invites the reader to the holy city of Byzantium. The line is ornamented with an anapestic first foot and a pyrrhic final foot, as well as an extra beat on the 11th syllable, which gives the line extra emphasis. These metric substitutions are used by Yeats to accentuate Byzantium as the central metaphor of the text. The immortal is of utmost importance, and so it gets its own metric deviation. Through the poem, Yeats writes on the agony of old age, the feeling that your heart has become trapped in a dying body. Vibrant imagery is conjured into the reader's mind as the man calls upon the gods to consume my heart away, that has been fastened to a dying animal. His decrepit body is expressed as no different to any other living creatures through this metaphor. Age will inevitably make any living being a dying animal. In calling to the gods for help, the persona admits that his isolation in society has left him sick with desire. The ostracization he experienced in his homeland has left him with a sickened heart full of a young man's desires, that he begs the wise sages to cleanse him of. Whilst the body decays, for every tatter in its mortal dress, the soul clap its hands and sing. It rejoices in growing ever closer to freedom. The personification of the soul here displays that the immortal soul is chained to its corporal form. So whilst the body decays and dies, it is the soul of the person that achieves immortality. The man's desires, then, are a manifestation of his soul's yearning to be free of its corporal form. The man, realizing the temporality of his biotic form, seeks to exist as a great artwork, declaring that once out of his mortal form, he will never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but instead hope to become as Grecian goldsmiths make, an all-knowing golden bird. The reference to the Grecian goldsmiths in this phrase suggests that the classical societies had it right, relating this reincarnation back to an immortalization that the Greeks would have intended through their art. The modern times, conversely, are plagued by materialism and sensuality too much that they don't even seek the immortal, their ignorance making them content with their temporal existence. As this artifice of eternity, his soul will finally be able to sing freely of what is past or passing or to come. As a work of art, he can live a freedom that is eternal, one where he is forever beautiful and appreciated. He will sit upon a golden bough, where an emperor can spend his nights admiring him, the past, present, and future becoming one, because the speaker will live for eternity. Whilst the human body decays and grows ugly, the artifice of eternity will remain always. This desire to inhabit a form immune to death mirrors Yeats' belief that through poetry he can escape the decay of the natural world and be remembered beyond his death. The old man is a surrogate of Yeats, as he expresses the exact same fears and desires. Yeats's concerns with old age saw it represent the tyranny of time, his rage against the limitations of being old frequently appearing in his work. Yeats wanted poetry to engage the full complexity of life. As a poet, he tries to transform his local concerns by embodying them in the resonantly universal language of his poems. Yeats always worried that his lifetime of work would not be enough to be remembered, but it is not likely that time will diminish his achievements. Through studying Sailing to Byzantium and Yeats' body of work as a whole, I have gained great insight into one of the 20th century's most influential poets, a man whose work spanned over 6 decades and is still read 100 years down the line. Yeats serves also as a reminder of the immense cultural change that occurred over his lifetime. His late modernist writing, in which he divulges his deepest fears and desires, reflect the pessimistic culture of a society ravaged by war. Yeats over these past few weeks has truly become one of my favourite poets, an intriguing wordsmith who speaks of universal concerns. For modernists, it was essential to move away from the merely personal towards an intellectual statement that poetry could make about the world, to distill the personal into a poetic texture that claimed universal human significance. And this is just what Yeats does with Sailing to Byzantium. His brilliant rhetoric and abundant oeuvre, strengthened by his power of rhythm and poetic understanding, have universal truth. As both a great imagist and symbolist writer in his old age, Yeats directly addresses his concerns, while still developing them with great artistry and symbolism. The holy city of Byzantium shines as literary gold for his audience to gaze upon in awe, as they resonate with Yeats and his timeless, human struggle of facing the uncertainty about death that comes with age. Thank you for listening to my analysis of Sailing to Byzantium by William Butler Yeats. I hope you enjoyed.